Isabel Allende does not need an introduction from me, because every writer, every lover of books and reading knows exactly who she is. However, I'm going to try to do her incredible career justice anyway. When I went to Allende's website to ensure I had the most accurate biographical information for her, I came across perhaps the most poetic About Me section I have ever read. So instead of rifling off facts and accolades and titles, I'm going to read exactly what Allende wrote about herself. Quote, "It is very strange to write one's biography because it is just a list of dates, events, and achievements. In reality, the most important things about my life happened in the secret chambers of my heart and have no place in a biography. My most significant achievements are not my books, but the love I share with a few people, especially my family, and the ways in which I have tried to help others. When I was young, I often felt desperate, so much pain in the world and so little I could do to alleviate it. But now I look back at my life and feel satisfied, because few days went by without me at least trying to make a difference." Probably the best example of the difference she has made can be seen in her founding of the Isabel Allende Foundation, which works to achieve social and economic justice for women and girls, and works with organizations worldwide whose exemplary work is aligned with their mission. But I know you're all also here for her extraordinary new book, A Long Petal of the Sea, which follows two young people as they flee the aftermath of the Spanish Civil War in search of a new place to call home. Of the book, author Colin McCann writes, "This is a novel not just for those of us who have been Allende fans for decades, but also for those who are brand new to her work. What a joy it must be to come upon Allende for the first time. She knows that all stories are love stories, and that the greatest love stories are told by time." Moderating tonight's event is David Epstein, author of the New York Times bestselling books Range and The Sports Gene. Previously, Epstein worked as a science and investigative reporter at ProPublica and a senior writer at Sports Illustrated. Please join me in welcoming to the stage David Epstein and Isabel Allende.
Thanks. Wow, this place is packed. Can you hear me? Yes, good. For once the microphone works for me. I have bad luck with microphones, and with men too.
I think this is going to be a really easy Q&A for me.
Yeah. I'm not including you in the men.
Right. So I'd like to start by, the New York Times review of your book came out yesterday.
No one has seen it because it's not printed anywhere.
It's not printed, it's only online. And you mentioned to my surprise that there was a period where you weren't always getting great reviews from the New York Times.
No, there was that woman, that Japanese woman, she was awful. And she was there like for a decade. I mean, finally they fired her or something. Sorry. I keep interrupting, so sorry. Go on, David.
I'm not nervous at all now about doing a good job. So I just want to read a sentence from the New York Times review. "She has deftly woven fact and fiction, history and memory to create one of the most richly imagined portrayals of the Spanish Civil War to date, and one of the strongest and most affecting works in her long career." So first of all, that's phenomenal praise, particularly given the career we're talking about here. And I sort of was particularly drawn to the richly imagined portrayals. I was struck over and over by the incredible detail in the book. There were things that stuck in my head, like your description of resistance fighters during the Spanish Civil War as realizing that 3 volumes of philosophy books when they're fighting on a university campus can block 1 bullet coming in. Or that nuns used cinnamon tea and milk with mustard seed to stanch bleeding. And every time I went to look to see if something was true, it turned out that it was. Which made me...
He was Googling me for weeks.
So it made me very first of all, impressed by your research process, but I hadn't realized that it was that deep when you do historical fiction. So can you talk a little bit about your research process and how important it was for this book?
Well, I've written several historical novels, which I love because the research gives you half the book. And then it's the setting, the theater where your characters will move. So really, there's very little to imagine if you have as many details that are facts, not alternative facts, facts. And so I get all these facts, and then I start. Usually, before I had books that were marked, and then I couldn't find the marks in the books. So now I try to keep everything in my mind and really concentrate. That's why I need silence and solitude and time to keep all this in my head. And then the book starts to happen and the characters move, and as they move, the research starts feeding the action and everything. And the details in all my books, but in this one, they were very easy to find because the civil war in Spain and everything that followed is recent history. This happened in 1939. So still, there are people alive today whose parents or grandparents lived that experience, and I could talk to them. And that is the best kind of research because you get details that you would never find in a book.
How did you find, for example, that 3 volumes of philosophy books can stop a bullet?
Well, that's true.
How did you find that out, though?
Because someone called. I was in Spain and promoting the book, and I was on the radio, and there were people calling in, and someone called in and said that, and I checked it, and it was true.
It's amazing. And
well, it depends on how thick the volume, I assume. Yeah.
I expect. So definitely go with like being in nothingness or something like that.
Yeah, it could be 3 Bibles also. I mean, whatever is thick enough.
And you just said that the research sets the stage for the characters, and then things start happening and characters start moving. But that's you moving them. It sounds almost like you're saying they just go and do what they do. Well,
once you define a character more or less, and the characters become very clear in 2 or 3 weeks, and in this case, I had models, human models, that inspired the characters. And then what they do has to reflect who they are. You cannot force them to do things that in real life these people wouldn't do because it doesn't work. So, for example, I love happy endings. I never have happy endings because in real life they don't happen. In real life, people get married and it's not happy ever after. It's for a while, usually a short while. And so it has to be appropriate, let's say, to who these people are. And I had a character, a person that was my friend, Victor Dalmau, who inspired the character of Victor Dalmau in the book. And he was this stern, tall, thin man, traumatized, depressed, smart, and very resilient. This was my friend. So it was very easy to create a character that was just like him. I just had to type, really.
That's amazing. Sometimes I've read that writers think of them, and by the way, I've only been married for a couple of years and my wife is here, so I'm going to ignore the first part of that answer.
Where's your wife?
Not sure. Oh, right there.
And they have a baby, a beautiful baby. I don't like kids, but this is really, really nice. Yeah. I don't know why people laugh.
We have limited time
that.
here. Don't laugh too long. I'm glad this is recorded because I'll play this for him when he can understand it. But you mentioned Victor, the main character in the book, who was someone that you actually knew. And one of the central events in the book has to do with the ship, the Winnipeg. And can you describe a little bit about what happened with the ship?
Well, the story stands by itself. Really, I didn't have to create the story. It's the kind of gift from heaven that you don't have to invent much. In 1939, the civil war in Spain ended after 3 years of brutal killing. And when Franco was coming to Barcelona, the last bastion of the Republicanos, 500,000 people left the city and walked in the coldest winter day toward the French border. And France didn't know what to do with 500,000 people in 24 hours in the border. Eventually, they opened the border and put them in concentration camps that they improvised in the beaches. Now, among these 500,000 people were intellectuals, professors, publishers, printers, people that the poet Pablo Neruda, the Chilean poet, had known before, because he was enamored of Spain. He loved Spain like a bride, he used to say, como una novia. And so he convinced the government of Chile to receive some refugees. And there was opposition to this, of course, because the right wing and the Catholic Church, they didn't want these migrants. And the rhetoric that you can read today of what was published in the newspapers then is exactly what we hear today in Europe and in the United States, treating the migrants as criminals, rapists, they come to take our jobs, they bring epidemics, exactly the same words 80 years ago. And so the government finally accepted. Pablo Neruda was sent to Paris with no money. So he had to raise the funds, buy a ship that was a dilapidated cargo ship, condition it to transport more than 2,000 people across 2 oceans to Chile. He selected the people, and he sent them to Chile, where they were received with open arms by the people of Chile. Not by the right wing and the church, of course, but yes, by everybody else. Among them, my family, by the way. And so this adventure would have not been possible without Pablo Neruda. And the Winnipeg became known as the ship of hope, because those people were saved in the nick of time. They arrived in Chile the same day that the Second World War started in Europe. And many of those refugees that were in concentration camps in France ended up being sent back to Spain, where many of them were killed, or sent to the Soviet Union, to the gulags, or ended up in extermination camps from the Nazis, or ended up in the Foreign Legion, who knows. Many were also accepted as refugees in Mexico, we have to say that. And so those who were able to find a place to go were saved. And I'm so glad that Chile accepted these people, because what they gave back to the country is unbelievable. If you check today in Chile, the great astronomers, musicians, painters, sculptors in Chile, professors, they all have Catalan names, descendants from the Winnipeg. So it's a beautiful story. They were never marginalized. Immediately they had jobs and homes and friends, and they gave back.
So that's an incredible story on a number of levels. Not only the fact that Pablo Neruda was involved with this, right? So there are a lot of real historical characters in your book. And Neruda, of course, better known for his poetry. I've read his poetry, but had never heard about the Winnipeg. But he said in reality that even if all my poetry is erased, this chartering of the Winnipeg cannot be erased.
He said that in his memoir, yes.
And one of the really interesting things, I thought, was, well, first of all, Victor was on the ship, your friend Victor.
Yeah, my friend was on the ship, yes.
Was on the ship, so that's helpful for research. So this is a lot of verisimilitude there. But also, Neruda was sent with marching orders that were, get workers, don't get people with ideas.
Yes.
Right? He said, don't take people with ideas. And what did Neruda do with those instructions?
Ignore the instructions, because these people had fled Franco because they had ideas, for God's sake. And they wanted to be, the government wanted to select skilled workers and no one with ideas, which of course Neruda absolutely ignored. And in a way it was great, because these people that came to Chile, Chile was a very provincial, little isolated country in the end of the world. And they shook the society. They brought Europe to Chile. They brought ideas.
And it's interesting, it really reminded me of, since I'm a science writer, of a study I'd been reading that showed looked at when countries are open and closed to the world in sort of alternating patterns and documented all these explosions of innovation when there is an influx of immigration. Not just among the immigrants, but also among the people who are there.
Yeah.
Oh, there's something about this importing of ideas and I think, as Neruda said, he wanted to awake Chile from its slumber right, with these by bringing those people over.
And he did, actually. And now there is a whole controversy in Chile about Neruda, because he is, of course, our most famous poet. But the new Me Too movement and the young feminists, with good reason, have declared him persona non grata because in his memoir he admits that he raped a woman. And I totally agree that he was a flawed person, as we all are. But you cannot eliminate the work, the creation, because of the flaws of the creator. Because in that case, there would be no one left. Who can say what the private life of all the great men and women that we know is perfect? Very few.
So the Winnipeg that Pablo Neruda chartered is sort of a bridge in the book from the Spanish Civil War, eventually to the coup in Chile. And Neruda's wanting to take people with ideas kind of reminded me of many years later in Chile when police came to search his home. He supposedly said to them, "Look around, there's only one thing of danger for you here, poetry." Which I thought he was sort of being sarcastic and saying he didn't have any weapons, but also being truthful in saying that the ideas are what is dangerous to you.
And that you can't kill. You can silence them for a while, but you can't kill them. It's interesting because Franco stayed in power as a dictator in Spain for 40 years. And then it was 40 years of censorship of cassocks and uniforms. The church was super powerful, and it was a country that was in a straitjacket. And then Franco dies, and in less than a year, there's what they call the destape. Everything exploded. Creativity, pornography, you name it, everything. And Spain sort of woke up from this long slumber, this long siesta.
So I want to get a little bit personal, because when I asked you if we could talk about personal things, you said, "David, there is no personal." So
nothing personal in my case. I'm sorry, Roger.
So in some of your previous books, you have written very famously, explicitly about your own life. In this case, you don't, but it's very conspicuous how many of the events track with your life, right? There are characters who are exiled, so after the Chilean coup, are exiled to Venezuela.
Well, there's where I met Victor.
Where you met Victor in exile in Venezuela. And I want to tell the audience a little bit about the story of your exile, because this was after, so in Chile, Salvador Allende becomes the first and maybe only democratically elected Marxist head of state ever, and is ultimately deposed in a military coup. And he's your cousin.
He's my father's cousin.
When was the last time you saw him before, I guess, 9/11, 1973, when he was killed?
Yeah, it was also a Tuesday. It's interesting. I saw him maybe a month before, because my stepfather was appointed ambassador to Argentina when Allende was elected in 1970. And he would come often to report to the government, because this is a time of great conflict between Argentina and Chile, the time when Perón arrived in Argentina after years of exile. So there was a lot of secret stuff going on. And the CIA was involved in toppling the government. So there were secret negotiations between Argentina and Chile, because Chile had been blocked economically and Argentina was trying to help. So my stepfather would come every month or every 2 months, and then I would see Allende, because there would be like a family luncheon or something. And at the time, the last time I saw him, there were rumors of the possibility of a military coup. And the right-wing newspaper El Mercurio was publishing big titles that said, "Gather hate, junten odio." The idea was that the violence was coming. And they were demanding that Allende step down from the government or commit suicide. They were already talking about comparing that situation with another president we had had many years before Balmaceda, who had committed suicide to avoid a military coup. And so they were asking Allende, and Allende said at the luncheon, I'm not going to renounce, I'm not going to leave the government because the people have put me here after many years of effort, and I'm only going to leave when my term is over or dead. And we all felt awkward because it was like a declaration in a family luncheon that didn't sort of fit the mood of the moment. But he knew what he was talking about. We didn't.
And just to underscore that again, the United States was involved in trying to undermine.
Well, as it was involved in Central America, in all of South America too, because it was the time of the Cold War when the United States, the area of influence of the United States was also Latin America, and the idea was to prevent any guerrilla or leftist movement or any leftist government. So they intervened in every country, practically.
And how did you, and this led to your exile, the coup?
Yeah, well, with many, many other people. I mean, I was just one of many.
Of course, but how did you decide that you had to go?
Because I was afraid. I couldn't live in fear, and I got involved in trying to help people, mostly because I didn't know what I was doing at the beginning, as many people did. So hiding people at home, or trying to get people into embassies or to cross the border into Argentina, trying to smuggle information out of the country. But as I said, I was a journalist, and many people were doing the same thing, and we didn't know the consequences because we had no experience in a military coup. We didn't know what was really happening until a bit later. And then as we got more information, and as the friends started to disappear and people left the country, and well, then there was a point when I was afraid. And so I left first with the idea of coming back. I left alone, and then a month later, my husband found out that I couldn't return, really, that it wasn't safe. So he reunited with me in Venezuela, and he brought the kids. And we thought it was temporary, as most refugees think. Most refugees leave their homes, they just lock the door with everything inside, and they leave. That's how we did it. And then the average time that a refugee spends away from home is between 17 and 25 years. Very few can come back. And when they do come back, most of them cannot come back with their children or grandchildren because they belong in another place. And that is exactly what happened to me. I never could go back. Well, by the time I could go back, I was in lust with an American, and I was here. So it was not that American, it was another one. I don't even like Americans. You know, my type is Antonio Banderas. So I like them dark and intense. Well, as my mother said, my mother always wanted to be a widow. And no, true, this is true. She had her black dress hanging in the closet, her purse, her shoes. And when she was dying, I said, Mom, you can't die because you're not a widow yet. And she said, well, you not always get what you want in this life. So when I think of Antonio Banderas, I remember my mother's words.
Well, pretty much, we're on a time limit here, no laughing. So pretty much all of those themes come up in the book, the themes of exile, of not being able to return.
Of Antonio Banderas.
Except Antonio Banderas.
Yeah.
Other than Antonio Banderas.
He wasn't born yet at the time.
No, but really they do. This feeling of, people don't know what's going on. They think it can't happen here. They're away and they think they're ready to go back.
Yeah.
By the time they can come back, it's no longer their home, right? I think this is it reminded me of the ancient Greek word nostos, which means homecoming, like Odysseus, that whether it's to a person or a place, everyone is searching for some sort of grounding or home in the book with varying degrees of finding it. And does it feel very personal to you? Because it seems like you've written about that theme quite a bit.
I've written about displaced people, migrants, and refugees in my last 3 books, and probably in other books that I don't remember, in memoirs I have. And it's very close to my heart because I understand what it is to not belong. And I will always be a foreigner. I go back to Chile and I am really happy for a week. And the second week, I realize I don't belong there either because too much time has gone by. And this is in the book, when finally my protagonists go back to Spain because Franco has died. 40 years have gone by, and they return to Spain, and there's nobody there they can recognize, not even the streets. There's nothing there for them, and they're already old, so there's no work for them either. And that's what happens to people who are displaced. And for me, as a writer, it's a good thing, because being a foreigner means that you have to be attentive. You don't take anything for granted. You ask questions, you observe, you listen, because you want to blend in, you want to belong, you want to understand. In your own place, you don't need any of it. It's your home. And now when I go back to Chile, I still know the rules, the codes, and it's comfortable for a week, and then I realize everything has changed. And I still and there also I have to listen and be attentive as I am here.
So how do you think the exile after the coup de Venezuela affected your professional trajectory as
When I was a journalist, a lousy journalist, by the way, but a journalist nonetheless.
I don't really believe that, given the historical research in the book.
I'm telling you, Pablo Neruda said that I was the worst journalist in the country. That I could never be objective, that I lied all the time, and if I didn't have a story, I made it up. Doesn't it sound familiar to you right now? I would blend in the media today. Well, so I had a TV program, I was writing theater. I felt that I owned the country, I was a queen. And then the military coup happened, and I ended up in Venezuela where nobody knew me, where I had no money, no connections, where I couldn't work as a journalist. I had to make a living with little odd jobs here and there to feed my children. And it took me years to adapt. I was coming from a country, Chileans are very sober people. And we were living in a dictatorship with censorship, so half the population was living in a state of repression and fear. The other half was very happy. And because that happens all the time, I mean, without the support of that half, the dictatorship would have not lasted 17 years. And I arrived in Venezuela, this green, generous country, the second richest country in the world because of the oil boom. So there was an abundance of everything. Venezuelans at the time consumed more champagne than all of Europe put together. I mean, every excuse was good for a party.
That's the kind of details I'm talking about.
Yeah, well, I lived that. I was there. Yeah, I was there. And I was there for the coup in Chile and for the repression that came afterwards. So it's easy to find the details because I've lived them.
But you also wrote your first book, In Exile.
I wrote after years in Venezuela, I finally found a job, a steady job. And that was, can you believe it, administering a school. I can't add. And I had to deal with banks. And my accounting was really creative. I don't know how, the thing barely survived the school. And after 4 years of this, we received a phone call at home that my grandfather was dying in Chile, and we couldn't go by to bid him farewell. So I started a letter for him to tell him that I remembered all his stories, and to prove it. And he could die. The idea was, you can die and go because I have everything with me. I have not forgotten anything. And to prove it, I started with the story of Rose, my great aunt Rose, who died poisoned in very mysterious circumstances that were never clear. And so that's Rose, the beautiful, in the House of the Spirits. And she has green hair. Many people ask me, why does she have green hair? Is that an error, a chemistry error? No. my grandfather would say that my Aunt Rosa my great Aunt Rosa was beautiful as a mermaid. And in the storybooks, the mermaids had green hair. So obviously, Rosa had green hair.
So do you think you would have, this letter you were writing to your grandfather became
The
your
House of the
first
Spirits.
novel. So do you think you would have become a novelist if you hadn't been exiled to Venezuela?
No, I would not be a writer today. I would still be a lousy journalist. By now, a retired lousy journalist.
So I want to get even a little more personal now. What did you think about Antonio Banderas in Desperados? No, I'm just kidding.
Well, I just saw A Pain and Glory, and he's older now, but he's still so attractive.
Okay.
I mean, he's really something.
Okay, so I went to the bio timeline on your website, and there are 7 events listed from 2018 to the present on your website. And I want to read 6 of them, okay? You received a National Book Award, as one does. Your mother and confidant, with whom you exchanged letters every day for years, passed away. Your new book was published, A Long Petal of the Sea. Your ex-husband of many years passed away. Your beloved stepfather passed away. And you got married here in Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
That's most of your bio timeline.
In 1 year.
And that's pretty intense.
And also 2 of my granddaughters got married.
Okay. So, a lot going on.
And I inherited my former husband's dog. She's a lovely, well, not lovely, she looks like a vampire. She's black, this size, and she farts all the time. So, and this is a problem because she can clear a room. So there is no social life with this dog in the house. It's a problem. If somebody knows anything about veterinarian or something, please give me a hint, because frankly, this is unbearable. Okay, let's go back to the book.
So, like, I need a good segue. Like that story, your bio timeline is a mix of sadness and humor, I would say.
Yeah, but you know what? I've been desperate because I didn't write anything in 2018. I start all my books on January 8th. And I did start something. I wanted to write something about my mother, and it didn't go anywhere. I was just stuck in the mourning and the sadness, and I couldn't write the story. So I spent the year without writing anything. And now January 8th happened again, and now I'm stuck again. So what if I won't be able to write anymore?
You might not make it as a writer if you don't.
Yeah, I can't imagine. It's sad. I mean, and it worries me, because what would I do? I am unemployable at this age.
So if anybody's looking to hire somebody. So why January 8th? Why do you start all your books on January 8th?
Because on January 8th, 1981, we received the phone call that my grandfather was dying. And I started The House of the Spirits, which became this incredibly successful book, very fast. And that paved the way for all my other books. So I thought, well, just for Kabbalah and superstition, let's start the second book on the same day, and then the third and the fourth. And now I can't change it, because I'm stuck with January 8th.
So, to go back to the personal part, I'm not sure we got away from the personal part, but to go back to it anyway, I don't want to do a spoiler, so I've never Q&A'd a novelist before. So without spoiling anything, one of the amazing things to me about A Long Petal of the Sea was it's about refugees and it's about displacement, but it's deeply about love. And the love story in the book between 2 of the main characters is very unusual from what I'm used to in literature and film and all those things. In many ways, it sort of plays out in reverse. And again, I don't want to give too many details, so I don't want to give a spoiler. But
just say it, because they won't read it. Don't worry about it. They will wait for the movie. Yeah.
I think they will.
Yeah.
But anyway, it plays out very much in reverse to what we're used to, right? With a connection of convenience, essentially. And as these characters progress through their life, something much more develops very much later in life. And it's really unusual. I'm not sure I've ever read a story like that. And again, to draw the parallel to your own life, as I mentioned on your bio timeline, it says you were married in Washington, D.C. not very long ago. And I was wondering if you can tell us a little bit about your own ongoing love story.
Well, the love story in the book begins with a marriage of convenience, and then it turns into a very deep and wonderful, complex friendship, and eventually it turns out in a passionate love affair, which happens when they are much older. And when I wrote the story, Roger wasn't my life, but we were not married. So it's not about him, it's about me. It's about, it's about my own romantic predisposition, let's say. I separated from my husband, Willie, with whom I had been for 28 years, and we remained friends. And people said at the time I was 72, why are you separating at this age? You'll be alone. It takes a lot of courage. Well, it takes more courage to stay in a relationship that isn't working than to separate. So I decided that I would live alone in a small house with my dog, and I'm not going to go in Match.com. Can you imagine what my profile would be? Short, bossy Latino grandmother? Who would answer that? Nobody. So I said, no, screw it, I just can't do that. But I wasn't looking for anybody. And then a guy who was, the daughter of the guy is here. It's very uncomfortable to talk about this. But it's funny because Roger had heard me on NPR, and he didn't like what I said, and he emailed my office. And he started emailing me every morning and every evening for 5 months. And when his daughter, Kathy, saw him doing this, he said, you realize this is not going anywhere, do you? But he kept writing. And then eventually, after 5 months, we met. And I asked him immediately, because I said, look, what are your intentions? Because I really have no time to waste. I'm 74 years old. And he choked on the ravioli, but he didn't run away. And eventually we did get married. He gave away everything he owned, sold his house, and moved to my house, which is, as I said, a very small house, with 2 bikes and some clothes that I promptly discarded because they were very dated. And we've been living together for how long? Huh? No, we haven't been living together 3 years. 1 year and a half or something like that. Well, we've been living together for some time with 2 dogs, 1 farting dog, in this small house, and bikes all over, and it's working. And so I believe that you can fall madly in love, passionately in love at any age. The only difference between this happening to me now at 77 or at 20 is that now I have a sense of urgency, that there's no time to waste, really. There's no time for pettiness, for little fights, for jealousy, for getting upset because of little things. How long do we have? Not much. So let's enjoy it. If I had known this with my other husbands, the several husbands that I have had before, maybe I wouldn't have so many divorces behind my back.
So I think the life advice from that is clear, that if you need a date, just go on NPR and be really interesting.
Yeah, don't go in Match.com. Go on NPR. Yeah.
There was another part of the story that I think you mentioned to me, that you were okay to meet Roger because your assistant had done some...
Oh, yeah. I had an assistant, Chandra, who loved the detective TV series. And so and we get, not often, but sometimes at the office we get a few stalkers, people who have nothing else to do, but weird people, who knows. And so we are very careful about the people who start writing to Match or sending gifts or whatever. And so when he started writing every day, twice a day, well, Chandra got in detective mood immediately and started researching. And you can find the most amazing information about just anybody online. I mean, everything, what kind of car he has, where he lived, how many children, his salary, how many taxes he paid. Why can't we find Trump's taxes? Why? I mean, everything is online.
Have you assigned it to your assistant?
So Chandra found out everything. I said, the guy is clear. So when I met him, and I realized that he was transparent and that Chandra had found out everything about him and it was true. He was not the usual stalker.
Not the usual stalker. That's high praise. So while we're on the funny stuff, I guess, I was interested to learn that you own the house that was the first brothel in Sausalito, California. And
yeah, but it's not a brothel anymore.
No,
yeah.
That's exactly what I was going to ask.
Yeah.
What is it now?
Well, it's similar. It's it's my office and my foundation office. And I say it's similar because stories, I mean, half of my stories are about sex. So in a way, I get inspired in the building. It's a good building.
And the home of your foundation, of course. So, can you describe the work of your foundation a little bit?
It would be easier to go on the website.
Okay.
But you type my name and the foundation comes up. The foundation was created after my daughter Paula died because I wrote a book called Paula and I decided that whatever income would come from that book belonged to Paula. And what would she do with it? She would do something for other people. And so I decided to create a foundation in her name. And it was sort of messy at the beginning. But then my son divorced and he had 3 babies and I was looking for a bride for my son. And I thought, well, if the bride can also run the foundation, that would be perfect. And so somehow I found the right person, Lori. And so Lori married my son, brought up my grandchildren, and runs the foundation. And the spirit of the foundation, the mission, is to invest in the power of women and girls because, as we know, whatever you invest in women multiplies. And so that's what we do.
And once again, Tinder be damned. You know, we don't need it. So I want to ask one more question, then we'll take some audience questions. But in an interview, you once said that when you were getting started...
Don't quote me because I lie a lot.
Well, I don't have anyone else to quote, so...
Yeah.
So, you said, perhaps true, perhaps not, that when you were getting started in South America, all the esteemed writers were male. As you said, the only women writers I had heard of were all some spinsters in England.
And they were dead. They had committed suicide.
And so you've become the role model. What has this journey been like? In terms of the landscape for women writers now versus what it was like when you started?
I'm talking South America, I mean Latin America. The rest of the world is different, was different. But in the boom of Latin American literature, we had at least 25, 30 fantastic writers that took the literary world by assault, really. They were all male, starting with Garcia Marquez, who was like the god, and all the rest. And it was said in the press that I was the only female voice in the boom. It was said that at the beginning, and then they said I didn't belong to the boom, definitely. And that was not true, because women were writing in Latin America since Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz in the 17th century. But their voices were either ignored or silenced or minimized. So if you studied literature in Latin America, you studied male writers. The reviews were for males. The big publishing houses wouldn't even be interested in women. That has changed, because now publishers know that more women than men read in general, and more women than men read fiction. And they like to read fiction written by other women. So there's a market out there. And for economic reasons, now there is a market also in the industry for women writers. So everything has changed. But not because of me. It's because suddenly there was this awareness of these women that were wanting books, buying books.
Well, but that also takes writers like you. I don't think anyone can do that single-handedly, but I think it's fair to say that you've played a role in...
The House of the Spirits did, because it sort of... it was such a sudden success that many publishers in Europe sort of looked for women writers in Latin America. They had been looking for men writers. And then suddenly they started looking for women writers.
So I want to take some of the audience questions for a couple minutes. So here's the first one is, what is your take on the current efforts in Chile to rewrite the Constitution and the role that Chilean artists have played in raising social consciousness?
Well, what's happening in Chile is very interesting. Chile was considered the oasis in Latin America, the only country that had social, political, and economic stability. And suddenly, because they raised the price of the subway, the equivalent of 15 cents, in 24 hours, the country exploded in anger. And no one was expecting it, not anybody in the country or outside the country. What happened? That there was discontent, anger accumulated, I would say, for 40 years, since the dictatorship. And this repressed anger was under pressure. And this little excuse of the 15 cents put people in the streets, manifesting at the beginning a few students. And then in a matter of 3 days, we had 1 million people in the streets of Santiago. What are they demanding? They demand, first of all, what they complain most about is inequality. Because Chile is unfortunately, one of the countries with the highest inequality in the world. So in the statistics, you see how economically progressive we've been, how good the country is doing economically. What the statistics don't show is how that money is distributed. So how wealth and opportunities are distributed is not in the statistics, in this country either. And so this sense that there was a group of people, very small group, 20 families, a few people that owned 25% of the wealth in the country, while 40% of the population can't pay basic services because everything was privatized during the dictatorship. The water you drink belongs to somebody. It doesn't belong to the people or the government, it belongs to a person. So the same with education, with healthcare, with transportation, with electricity, with everything. And I think that what people are demanding in the change of the Constitution is that the economic model be changed. I don't think that people really know what the Constitution stands for. Who has read the Constitution? Very few people. But there is a sense that by changing the Constitution, we can change the model in Chile. We'll see. There has been a lot of violence, violence of the police against the protesters, and a lot of, they have been burning buses and destroying churches, and it has been really, certain groups have been very violent and destructive. And so this has been also an excuse for great repression. But most people are peaceful citizens like any of us who just want change. And they are willing to go out in the street and get rubber bullets in the eyes. There were several people that have been blinded by the police. So this is happening today in Chile, and we will see how this evolves. It could go very badly. We could have a leader that could lead the country to who knows where. There are no leaders right now. Or it could go into a better Chile in many ways. Let's hope so.
So the next question first says, you're such an inspiration for Latina women, thank you. And my college thesis was on the stories of Eva Luna. What was the inspiration behind those pieces?
Well, when I wrote Eva Luna, which is the story of a storyteller, some people said, well, the stories that she tells are not in the book. At that time, I came on a book tour to the United States. And in California, I met Willie, who was the guy I fell in love with. And I moved to his house without an invitation. And then I forced him into marriage because I needed a visa. Not only for myself, I needed to sponsor my kids. And his life was a mess, a total mess. His house was just incredibly messy. He had 3 biological children, the 3 of them drug addicted. So you can imagine what that household was like. And there was no place for me. There was no room of my own where I could work. The only advantage of short stories is that you can write them in a week or 2 or maybe 3. But it's a brief time, not like a novel that needs this expansive time and a place where you have to write it. So I wrote the stories because the only advantage of short stories is this. A short story is much more difficult to write than a novel, because a short story needs precision, direction, speed, tension. You have to know from the very beginning how it ends. It has to have a punchline. It's closer to poetry than to prose. And in a novel, it's like a tapestry. You can make many mistakes and people don't even notice. Because they're distracted with the drama and they don't notice, not in a short story. But I could write those short stories sitting in a car, in a parking lot, in a coffee shop, in a park. There was no other place. And so that's how I wrote those stories. Mm. And they're all, in one way or another, love stories. Because I was in love, why else?
So with everything you've done as a writer, what is left to do?
I don't plan. I live day by day with the idea that I might die. When we leave here, I can fall in the stairs and die. And it's fine.
That wouldn't be fine.
No, it would be a problem for the synagogue, I'm sure. But what I mean to say is that I don't plan anything. I don't know. My life is not a career. My life is walking in a sort of road. And this road has had changes of directions, crossroads, in accidents that were completely out of my control. And I thought I was going in one direction, and then something happened, and I was turned in another direction and had to start again. So planning doesn't work for me, because I know something can happen tomorrow, and then I have to change gears and go in another direction.
And to add to this person's question, is there any particular kind of book that you haven't written that you'd like to write?
Well, I thought for a long time that I wanted to write an erotic novel, but my mother was alive. And then my mother died recently, and now I'm too old. I don't even believe in eroticism anymore. I can't even remember how it was. Do you remember? He's so young. I mean, it breaks my heart. It really, because you have so much more to live and to suffer.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I'm the cue here.
Yeah.
So, next question. Is there a paradox with exile? Despite the trauma, it opens up great opportunities, new experiences, or a wider world?
Yes, yes. Getting out of your comfort zone, being displaced, losing stuff makes you stronger and makes you different. I think that in my case, it made me a writer, but it also made me more fearless. I look at my life today, and except for very few people that I adore, that I don't want to lose, nothing makes me afraid. Because whatever happens is fine. I can deal with it. I've already dealt with so many losses that I feel very strong. And I think that exile makes you strong, makes you, well, some people are defeated completely, but it's not usually the case. We somehow find strength in us that we didn't know we had. You have to, try, how can I say it, develop the muscle for life. And the trials of life, the losses, the sorrows, is part of that training for life, which is good.
So this next question is from a high school Spanish teacher who looks for any reasons to include you in their work or lessons. And the question is, do you have any advice or recommendations on how to keep feminism relevant to our young girls or ladies today?
You don't have to do any effort. It's out there. It's in the air. It's all over. With the Me Too movement and the LGBTQ and everything else, it's there and it's happening. It's a new wave of feminism. For a while, I was so worried because I thought that feminism was, the backlash of feminism had been so strong that it was sort of stuck. And I would see young women who didn't want to say that they were feminists, although they benefited from all the things that their mothers and grandmothers had obtained, but they didn't want to be called feminists because it wasn't sexy. Well, call it anything you want, but the fight is there, and the work needs to be done. And now there's this new young wave of young women doing things. So I don't think you have to tell the teacher, don't worry about it. Okay. It's going to happen no matter what.
Don't worry about it, wherever.
Yeah.
So I think we might have a lot of people in the audience who either want to write professionally or write on their own time. And so this question is, do you have any advice for writers?
I would say that writing is pretty much like training for sports, and you are a sports writer, you know about this. You train and train and train to be able to play the game. And nobody cares how much you've trained. Nobody cares about the effort or how many times you have sprained a leg or whatever. It doesn't matter. What matters is the performance at the end, the result. And with writing, unfortunately, it's the same. Nobody cares how many drafts you've made, how many hours you have spent. The effort doesn't matter at all. What matters is the end result, which is the book. And I would say just invest in it as much time and discipline as you can, as an athlete would, or someone who plays a game. And don't show it to many people, because you get a lot of input and you get distracted. And this is happening to me right now. And with all the experience I have, I'm getting too much input about a book that I want to write about women. And I'm so confused that I can't write anything. Probably I will not write the book because of the input. So don't share it. Just be quiet, work as the best you can, and then when you think you have a final, almost perfect manuscript, you find the right editor or agent to work with.
How many drafts of this book did you go through?
Only one, because this book was very easy to write. Very easy. I just had to type the story. That's the truth.
Like taking dictation from your characters?
Yeah, I mean, the story was there.
And so when you're in that mode where the characters are sort of talking through you, do you then sort of avoid socializing a lot? Or
yes. Yes. And this is something that now Roger is understanding, that when I am writing, I'm a different person. I think a much better person, because I don't interact with anybody. And so everybody's very, very happy when I am in the attic writing. But as I was telling you before, because I have the whole book in my head, I need silence and many hours. Solitude is important.
What do you hope readers get out of your books?
Whatever they want, because I'm not trying to deliver a message. I want to tell a story, to share a story that I think that, at least for me, is important. And some readers might find one thing in a book or nothing, and some others might find something different, depending on the reader's experience and their own sentiments, their own feelings, their own past. They might find things that I didn't even intended to put in there. They just happen to be between the lines. And I think this happens to every writer, that I get a lot of letters and personal testimonies of people who say, you changed my life because of this or that. And then I start thinking, I never intended that. It just happened by chance. And it wasn't me. This was in the person. The person needed a sentence or an excuse or a story to bring out what they already had inside. I can't put anything inside anybody.
From my perspective, having read the book, I've read a lot of Neruda and had never heard of the Winnipeg. So one of the things I hope comes from it is that it returns this incredible story to some prominence among people's consciousness, because it's such an incredible story. I was surprised that I hadn't heard of it, and I think it will do that. So thank you for that. I think we have to kind of close up now. I only have one complaint about the book, actually, which is that one of the characters says that all babies of a certain age look like Winston Churchill.
Yours does not.
Having a baby of a certain age, I've been having trouble getting that out of my head. But there's an incredible character in the book. Again, another person who I was surprised to find is a real person, named Elizabeth Eidenbenz. And it turns out, like so much in the book, that she was real, and she gave, well, can you tell us about her a little bit, this character in the book?
I stumbled upon this on my research, and these are the gifts of research, when you go deeply into the documents. During the Spanish Civil War, there was a young Swiss nurse called Elizabeth Eidenbenz, and she worked with children during the Battle of Madrid. She was trying to feed the children, save the children, take the children out of Madrid during this long, prolonged, and horrible battle. Then, when the people left Catalonia and went to France, she followed these people, and then realized that in the concentration camps, the children were dying. And the mothers who were pregnant were giving birth to dead children. And so she tried to create a maternity in a house. In the book, she's still working in a house. But later, she got hold of a sort, it's called castle, but it wasn't a castle. It's a large mansion, let's say, that was abandoned in Elba. And this woman, this woman created this maternity and would take the women who were pregnant or had just given birth out of the concentration camps, the French concentration camps, and give them a safety place to give birth. This is historical. Then the Second World War began, and this woman started hiding Jewish mothers there. She saved more than 600 children that were born in this place, many of them from gypsy mothers or Jewish mothers or refugees. And eventually the Nazis, the Gestapo was after her, they closed the place. But she lived a very long life. She lived to be in her late 90s and died not that long ago. She ended her life in the village where she was born in Switzerland. And her life story was not known until some of the children that were born in this maternity looked for her, and they found her. And the story was rescued from oblivion. And that's how I stumbled upon Elizabeth.
It's a beautiful story in the book, and I think to end tonight, well, first I'd like to thank you for doing me the honor of letting me participate in this.
You had to prepare. I mean, you did the job. Thank you.
But I'd like to end with a quote from Elizabeth Eidenbenz that appears in the book that stuck with me. And this is another character who would like to marry her. Asks, what plans do you have for when this war is over? And Elizabeth replies, to find another one. There's always war somewhere in the world. What about you? And I thought that was like the book itself, and it was poignant, funny, sad, and harrowing all in a few lines. And that's how I found the experience of reading this book. And I hope everyone will take the time to read it
Thank
as well.
you so much, David.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. You're great. Thank you, my dear. Thank you. Thanks. Thank you, everybody. Thanks. Thank you.